That morning, my husband casually announced he was moving in with his ex-wife for 1 month to be transparent, while his daughter aimed her phone to record my breakdown. I did not scream. I simply put down my spoon and made one call. That call would soon turn their lives into rubble, while I ascended to a luxury they could never touch again. It all began with a single paper he signed without reading. My name is Renly Hall, and at 34 years old, I had learned that utter devastation rarely arrives with a scream. It does not crash through the front door with a battering ram or announce itself with thunder. Sometimes, in the most terrifying instances, it arrives over lukewarm coffee and a half-eaten bagel, delivered in a tone so casual it feels like a comment on the overcast Illinois weather. "It is just for 1 month. Renly," Graham said. He spread cream cheese on his toast with a terrifying calmness, the silver knife scraping against the crust with a rhythmic, grating sound. "Lauren needs help post-surgery. I will be staying at her place. It is for transparency. You want me to be an honest man, right?" The air in our small kitchen in Lakehurst seemed to be sucked out through the vent over the stove. Silence did not fall. It slammed into the room. My husband, Graham Cole, had just told me he was moving with his ex-wife. He called it transparency. I called it an audit finding so severe it required immediate liquidation of the asset. I did not blink. I did not gasp. My eyes shifted slightly to the right, towards the granite countertop island. Tessa was there. Graham's 21-year-old daughter was leaning against the counter. Her posture feigned nonchalance, but her energy was predatory. She held her smartphone up. The camera lens pointed directly at my face. I could see the reflection of the ring light in her eyes. She was waiting for the breakdown. She was waiting for the ugly sob, the shaking hands, the screaming match that she could edit down to 15 seconds, filter with a grainy vintage effect, and post with a caption about toxic stepmothers and boundaries. She wanted content. She wanted my humiliation to be her viral moment. Then there was Milo. My son sat across from me. At 14 years old, he was still young enough to need his mother's protection, but old enough to understand the jagged edges of adult cruelty. He was frozen. His knuckles were white where he gripped his cereal spoon. He looked from Graham to me, his eyes wide, a silent, terrified question trapped in his throat. He was waiting for the explosion. He was bracing for the shrapnel. I looked at Milo, and that was the moment the switch flipped. At Vestra Lum Capital Risk Lab, where I work as a senior risk analyst, we have a term for panic unauthorized variable. You do not react to an unauthorized variable with emotion. You react with containment. When I see a column of numbers that do not add up, I do not weep over the mathematics. I freeze the data. I isolate the anomaly. I prepare the report. Graham and Tessa were no longer my family in that split second. They were anomalies. They were bad data. A strange, cold sensation washed over me, starting at the base of my spine and rising to the back of my neck. It was a complete emotional shutdown. The hurt, the betrayal, the sting of Graham choosing Lauren again, it all hit an invisible wall and vanished. What remained was pure, crystalline logic. I watched Graham take a bite of his toast. He was chewing slowly, watching me, expecting the fight. He wanted the fight. He wanted me to be the villain so his departure would feel justified. He wanted me to scream no so he could sigh and tell his friends I was controlling. I would not give him the satisfaction. I would not give Tessa the footage. I gently placed my spoon into my oatmeal. The click of metal against ceramic was the only sound in the kitchen. "Okay," I said. My voice was steady, flat, devoid of any tremor. It sounded like I was confirming a dinner reservation. "Let me make a call." The reaction was immediate and disappointing for them. Tessa's thumb hovered over the record button, her brow furrowing. This was off script. Where were the tears? Where was the pleading? Graham stopped chewing. He let out a short, scoffing laugh, a sound that lacked genuine humor. "Calling your mom?" Graham asked, a smirk touching the corner of his lips. "Or are you calling Sarah to complain? Go ahead." "Renly? Vent. I get it. It is a big adjustment for you. He thought I was seeking comfort. He thought I was reaching out for a shoulder to cry on because he still believed, in his immense arrogance, that he was the center of my emotional universe. He thought I was calling for sympathy. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my silk pajama bottoms. I walked past Milo, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder, a silent signal that said, "Hold steady." I walked past Tessa, ignoring the camera lens tracking my motion. I slid open the glass door to the balcony and stepped out into the crisp morning air. I slid the door shut behind me and locked it. The click of the lock was satisfying. Through the glass, I could see them. Graham was shaking his head, performing a pantomime of the misunderstood husband for Tessa's camera. Tessa rolled her eyes, lowering the phone slightly, bored by my lack of hysteria. They looked like characters in a silent movie. They looked small. I lifted my phone and dialed a number I had memorized 4 months ago. It was not my mother. It was not my best friend. Marisol Vega, a sharp professional voice answered on the second ring. "It is Renly Hall," I said, turning my back to the glass door so they could not read my lips. I gazed at the gray Lakehurst skyline. "He just initiated the exit strategy. He is moving to her house for 1 month." Marisol Vega was not a therapist. She was a shark in a tailored suit. I had met her when she represented a whistleblower in a massive fraud case I had audited at Vestralum. We had bonded over forensic accounting and the ruthless efficiency of contract law. When I first started noticing the discrepancies in my marriage, the missing cash, the lies, the weird hours, I had not confronted Graham. I had called Marisol. "Did he sign the rider?" Marisol asked. "Not yet," I said. "But he will. He thinks he has the upper hand. He thinks I am weak." "Excellent," Marisol replied. I could hear the smile in her voice. "Execute phase 1. Do not sign anything he gives you. Make him sign your document. The one we drafted for the separation of assets during a temporary leave. Did you print it?" "It is sitting under my laptop in the living room," I said. "Get him to sign it. Renly, once that ink is dry, we pull the trigger. Remember, 30 days. If he is gone for 30 days, the clause activates." "I know," I said. My heart rate had not even accelerated. It was terrifying how calm I felt. I was dissecting my life like a cadaver. "I am going to destroy him, Marisol. I am going to take every single thing that is mine." "Just stick to the facts," she advised. "No emotion. You are a ghost. You are a machine." "I am a risk analyst," I corrected her. "And I have just identified a toxic asset." I hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air. Inside the kitchen, Graham was pouring himself more coffee. He looked relaxed. He thought he had won. He thought he was going to spend a month playing house with his ex-wife, free from responsibility, while I kept his seat warm and paid his bills. He thought he could walk out that door and come back whenever he pleased. He had no idea that for the past 6 months, I had been tracking every transaction, every lie, every late-night text. He had no idea I knew about the credit cards he opened in my name. He had no idea that the friend I was calling was actually the architect of his financial ruin. I returned to the glass door. I unlocked it. I was not just Renly Hall, the tired wife and stepmother. I was the woman who found the errors in the ledgers of Fortune 500 companies. I was the woman who could spot a lie in a spreadsheet from a mile away. I slid the door open and stepped back into the warmth of the kitchen. I picked up my spoon. I looked at Graham, and for the first time in years, I smiled. It was a small, tight smile. "Okay," I said again. "If you are going, we need to handle the paperwork." The camera was back on me. The game had begun, and they were playing checkers while I was already 3 moves away from checkmate. To understand why I did not scream that morning, you have to understand how I make my living. I am a senior risk analyst at Vestralum Capital Risk Lab. My job is not glamorous. I do not wear designer heels to glass-walled offices to shake hands with CEOs. Instead, I sit behind dual monitors and hunt for the things people try to hide. I look for the ghost employees on payrolls, the vendor invoices that round up too perfectly, and the assets that depreciate faster than physics allows. I live my life in the margins of error. My entire career is built on the premise that if you look at the data long enough, the truth will eventually float to the surface like oil on water. My days usually began at 5 in the morning. While Lakehurst slept under a thick blanket of gray mist, I was already awake, brewing black coffee that tasted like battery acid and staring at spreadsheets that spanned thousands of rows. I liked the silence. It was the only time the house felt like mine. In those quiet hours, I was the engine that kept our lives running. I processed client files to pay the mortgage on a house Graham picked out but could not afford. I analyzed quarterly projections to cover the health insurance premiums and the tuition for Milo's private school because the public district here had failed him twice. I was the invisible infrastructure of the Cole household. Then there was Graham. My husband was a regional manager for Trail Forge Outfitters, a chain of retail stores selling camping gear to people who mostly camped in their backyards. If you met Graham, you would like him. Everyone did. He had a smile that crinkled at the corners and a voice that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. But after 4 years of marriage, I had realized Graham was not a partner. He was a sales pitch that never ended. He was always on the verge of a massive promotion. He was always one handshake away from a district director title that would double his salary. He spoke in projections, never in actuals. But looking at our joint bank account, his contribution remained a flat line, stagnant and unremarkable, while his promises inflated like a bubble waiting to burst. He was a high-risk asset with low returns, but I had convinced myself that his charm was the dividend. The bubble got more crowded when Tessa moved in. She was 21 and taking a mental health semester off from a university degree I was fairly certain she was failing. She arrived with 3 suitcases, a ring light, and a declaration that she was now a full-time content creator. To Tessa, I was not a stepmother or even a parental figure. I was the unpaid staff. I was the facility manager of a dormitory where the rent was zero and the fridge was always stocked. She would walk past me in the hallway, eyes glued to her screen, muttering about engagement metrics, treating me with the polite indifference one reserves for a hotel maid. She called Graham Dad with a syrupy sweetness, but to me, she rarely spoke at all unless the Wi-Fi was lagging. We had what looked like a normal life. We had movie nights on Fridays. Graham would pick the film, usually an action movie from the 90s he had seen a dozen times. He would sprawl on the leather recliner, laughing loudly at the jokes. Tessa would sit on the other end of the sectional, scrolling through TikTok, the blue light of her phone illuminating a face that looked bored by our very existence. Milo, my sweet, quiet 14-year-old, would curl up in the corner, trying to make himself invisible, and I would be there, folding laundry or paying the electric bill on my laptop, keeping the machinery of the household oiled and functioning. I told myself this was fine. This was stability. I was 34, not 22. I did not need passion. I needed reliability. There was no physical abuse. There were no shouting matches where neighbors called the police. In the risk portfolio of modern relationships, I categorized my marriage as low yield but low volatility. It was boring, but it was safe, or so I thought. I told myself that Graham was just stressed about work and that Tessa was just going through a phase. I rationalized the data because I wanted the investment to work. But the thing about being a risk analyst is that your brain never truly turns off. You start noticing patterns even when you do not want to. It started with small disrespect, data points of emotional depreciation. I remember coming home late one Tuesday after closing a massive audit for a pharmaceutical client. My eyes were burning from staring at screens for 12 hours. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Marinara sauce was splattered on the white backsplash. Dishes were piled high in the sink, and a sticky film coated the floor. Tessa was there, filming a day in the life video. She had positioned her camera to catch the mess behind her, rolling her eyes and captioning it "living with messy people." Graham stood there, leaning against the fridge, laughing. He saw me walk in, exhausted, dropping my heavy laptop bag on the floor. He did not tell her to stop. He did not offer to help clean up the mess they had made. He just chuckled and said that I should not look so serious because it was just for the internet. I swallowed the rage. I put on my yellow rubber gloves and scrubbed the sauce off the tiles while Tessa edited her video in the living room, the sound of her own voice looping on playback. I told myself it did not matter, but in my head, a red flag went up, a variable had shifted, the respect was gone, and when respect leaves a merger, the collapse is usually imminent. I started looking at my marriage not as a wife, but as an auditor, and once I put on those lenses, the numbers began to scream. That's when I realized my intuition had been trying to warn me for months. The portfolio was not just underperforming, it was fraudulent, in the world of forensic accounting. Fraud rarely announces itself with a confession. It reveals itself in the silence between the numbers, in the sudden change of long-standing habits. When you audit a company, you look for the anomaly in the routine. In my marriage, the first anomaly was Graham's phone. For 4 years, Graham had been a man with nothing to hide. His phone used to sit face up on the coffee table, vibrating with mundane notifications about fantasy football or sale alerts from hardware stores. But security protocols changed. The phone began to live in his pocket. When he did set it down, the screen was always facing the mahogany surface of the table. If a notification chimed, his hand would dart out to silence it with the reflex speed of a trader covering a bad bet. He started taking it into the bathroom for showers. He took it to the garage to get a soda. It was classic behavior of a client trying to conceal off-book transactions. He had fortified his digital perimeter. Then came the scheduling irregularities. Suddenly, his district required regional strategy meetings every Wednesday and Friday evening. He would come home after 9 at night, smelling not of the stale office coffee and dry erase markers that defined his usual workday, but of something floral and expensive. Once, I found a faint smudge of coral lipstick on his collar. When I pointed it out, purely as an observation, he laughed it off with a practiced ease, claiming he had been helping set up a new mannequin display and got too close to the props. It was a flimsy excuse, the kind that would get a mid-level manager fired during a compliance review, but he delivered it with such confidence that I remained silent. I did not argue. I just filed the data point away. Tessa, however, was the leak in his security system. While Graham was careful, his daughter was sloppy. I noticed a correlation in our household data whenever Graham had his regional meetings. Tessa's mood spiked. She would dress up, put on full makeup, and leave the house shortly after he did. One Friday night, while I was home helping Milo with a geometry project, a notification popped up on my iPad. Tessa was live on TikTok. I clicked on it. She was not at a club or a friend's dorm. She was in a living room with beige walls and plush white furniture, Lauren's house. In the background, I could hear laughter. It was Graham's laugh. Tessa was holding up a glass of wine, beaming at the camera. "Girls' night with the best crew," she chirped, panning the camera around. For a split second, Graham came into the frame, sitting on the white sofa, his feet up on the coffee table, shoes off, completely at home. "Honestly," Tessa said to her followers, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "it feels so good to be at Dad's real home." She caught herself a second later, eyes widening as she read a comment, and abruptly ended the stream. By the time I refreshed the page, the video was gone, but the metadata was already etched in my mind. The timestamp, the location, the phrase real home. I did not confront them. A rookie mistake would be to blow up the investigation before you have the full paper trail. Instead, I opened the household ledgers. I have always managed our finances. It made sense. I do this for a living. I pulled up the joint checking account and started filtering the transactions for the last quarter. The pattern was glaring. There were cash withdrawals of $200, $300, occurring consistently on Wednesday afternoons. Then there were the dining charges, the steakhouse in the Harborcrest district, the oyster bar on the waterfront. These were places where a dinner for two cost more than our weekly grocery budget. I had never set foot in Harborcrest district with Graham. We ate at chain restaurants with coupons, yet here he was, spending hundreds of dollars on dinners that coincided perfectly with his late meetings. I exported the bank statements to a spreadsheet and highlighted every suspicious transaction in yellow. It looked like a crime scene map. Then came the moment that turned my blood cold. I remembered helping a colleague a year ago who was going through a divorce. Her husband had racked up $50,000 in debt in her name without her knowing. It is a common tactic in financial abuse. Driven by a sudden, sickening instinct, I logged into the annual credit report server. I bypassed the joint accounts and went straight to my personal credit file. Identifying myself with my social security number, the report loaded, and the screen filled with red flags. There were 3 credit cards I did not recognize. One from a travel rewards bank, one from a luxury department store, and one general line of credit. All had been opened in the last 6 months. All of them were maxed out. I clicked on the travel card transaction history. My breath hitched. Red Willow Suites, a boutique hotel downtown. There were charges for overnight stays on dates that did not match his Wednesday and Friday pattern. These were random Tuesdays. A Saturday afternoon. Golf trip. The total debt on these fraudulent cards was nearly $18,000. Graham had stolen my identity. He had used my social security number, which he had access to from our tax filings, to fund his affair with his ex-wife. He was buying her dinner, buying her gifts, and renting hotel rooms, all on my credit. He was leveraging my financial stability to subsidize his betrayal. My hands did not shake. I felt a strange, icy clarity settle over me. This was no longer just a marriage crisis. This was a fraud. This was embezzlement. I switched modes. I was no longer Renly the wife. I was Renly the senior risk analyst. And I had just discovered a massive internal breach. I spent the next 3 nights building the case file. I took screenshots of every single fraudulent transaction. I downloaded the credit card agreements that bore a digital signature that was clearly not mine. I went back through Graham's emails on the shared home computer. He had forgotten to log out of his personal Gmail and found the confirmation emails from the hotel. I forwarded them all to a secure, encrypted drive. I saved Tessa's deleted TikTok. I had screen recorded it the moment I saw it. A habit from years of capturing fleeing data. I had dates. I had time. I had geolocated photos. I had financial statements linking his spending to the days he claimed to be working. 2 days before the breakfast announcement, I asked Marisol Vega to lunch. I told her I had a hypothetical client with a complex portfolio issue. We sat in a quiet corner of a bistro near her office. I laid out the scenario: a spouse diverting marital assets, identity theft involving credit lines, and a probable impending separation initiated by the cheating party. Marisol listened, eating her salad, her eyes sharp. "This client," she said, looking directly at me, "needs to protect herself immediately. If the husband leaves, he might try to saddle her with that debt. She needs a separation agreement that insulates liability. She needs to freeze the joint assets the second he walks out the door. And if he signs an agreement stating he is financially independent during a trial separation," I asked. "Then he hangs himself with his own rope," Marisol said. "If he signs that, and you have proof of the fraud, you can not only clear your name of the debt, you can crush him in court, but he has to sign it willingly." I nodded. "I think the client can make that happen." "Tell the client," Marisol said, reaching for the check, "that she needs to be ice cold. No tears, no screaming. Just business. She knows," I replied. That was the moment the plan solidified. I realized I was not just going to leave Graham. I was going to let him destroy himself. I was going to let him think he was winning. Let him walk out the door with his arrogance intact. And then I was going to bring the entire financial roof down on his head. I went home that evening and looked at him sleeping on the couch, mouth open, snoring softly. He looked so harmless, but my spreadsheet numbers told another story. He was a liability, and it was time to cut my losses. I walked back into the kitchen, the glass door sliding shut behind me with a heavy, final thud. The air in the room was thick, stagnant with the arrogance of 2 people who believed they had cornered a wounded animal. Graham was still leaning back in his chair, swirling the last dregs of his coffee. Tessa had lowered her phone slightly, likely saving the previous clip to her drafts, but she snapped it back up to eye level the moment I stepped onto the tile. "So," Graham said, his voice laced with a patronizing patience, as if he were explaining a simple addition to a toddler. Did you yell at your mom? Look, Renly, you have to understand context. Lauren just had foot surgery. It is a complex reconstruction. She cannot walk. She has no one else to help her get groceries or carry laundry up the stairs. I am doing this out of kindness. It is about transparency. Would you prefer I sneak around? I am telling you to your face that I'm going to stay there for 1 month to help the mother of my child. That is honesty. You should be grateful for that. Grateful? He wanted gratitude for abandoning his wife to play nursemaid to the woman he was sleeping with. I did not sit back down. I stood at the head of the table, my hands resting flat on the cool granite surface. I looked him dead in the eye. Let us clarify the logistics of this honesty, I said. My voice was stripped of all warmth. It was the voice I used when presenting a grim quarterly projection to a board of directors. You are moving your belongings into her house for 1 month. Where exactly will you be sleeping? Graham blinked. He had expected emotional flailing, not a deposition. The guest room, he said quickly. Too quickly. Obviously. And the finances? I pressed. Who is paying for your food, your gas, and your incidental expenses while you are living in another woman's house? It is just a month. Renly, he scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Stop acting like I'm moving to Mars. We have a joint account. I will use our money. It is not like I stopped being your husband just because I'm helping her out. There it was, the entitlement. He intended to finance his romantic getaway with the paycheck I earned. No, I said. The word hung in the air, sharp and absolute. Excuse me. Graham's brow furrowed. I said no. I walked over to the living room area, which was open to the kitchen, and grabbed my laptop bag. I pulled out my sleek, silver computer and set it down on the dining table, right in front of his half-eaten toast. I opened the lid, the screen glowing to life. If you leave this house for more than 14 consecutive nights to cohabitate with a former partner, I classify that as a de facto separation. That is not a visit. That is a change of residence. You are being ridiculous. Tessa chimed in from the counter, zooming in on my face. God, you are so controlling. Everyone needs space. Renly, let him live. I ignored her completely. I typed in my password and pulled up the document Marisol had emailed me 2 days prior. It was a standard separation of assets agreement, but as I scanned the clauses, my fingers flew across the keyboard, making real-time adjustments based on the risk profile I had analyzed. If you want to leave for 30 days, I said, my eyes fixed on the screen, then we are going to do this legally. We are going to sign a 30-day financial separation agreement. For the next month, our finances are completely severed. You do not touch the joint account. You do not touch my savings. You pay for your own life. You are dramatizing this with lawyer talk, Graham sneered, though I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. You think you can scare me with a Word document? I am protecting my assets, I said, typing the final clause. Here is the deal. During this 30-day period, any debt incurred by either party is the sole responsibility of that party. Any income earned remains with the earner. The vehicle registered to my name stays with me. The vehicle registered to you stays with you. I knew exactly what I was doing. The SUV he drove was registered to me. The luxury sedan he had been eyeing was just a fantasy. He effectively had no car in his name. And the debt clause. That was the trap. The moment he signed this, all those fraudulent credit cards he was maxing out would legally become his sole burden if I could prove he was the one spending the money, and I could prove it. I turned my laptop to face him. Sign it, I said. You want to go? Go, but you sign this first. Prove to me that you are independent enough to take care of yourself without my paycheck. Graham looked at the screen. The text was dense, full of legal jargon about liability and asset forfeiture. He looked at Tessa. She was filming him, broadcasting this moment to her followers. He had a choice. He could read it carefully and look weak and controlled by his wife, or he could brush it off and look like a man who could not be bothered by his nagging wife's petty rules. His ego made the decision for him. You want a signature? Graham laughed, a harsh barking sound. Fine, if it gets you off my back, I will sign your little contract. I do not need your money. Renly, I will make my own. He did not read a word. He did not see the clause on freezing joint assets. He did not see the clause that identified the SUV as my sole property. He grabbed the digital stylus I offered him and scrawled his signature across the bottom of the screen with a flourish. There, he said, tossing the stylus onto the table. Happy? Can I leave now? Or do you want a blood sample too? Tessa giggled. My dad, she narrated to her phone, panning up to his smug face. The most honest man you will ever meet. Standing up to the toxicity, I saved the document. I emailed a copy to Marisol and another to my secure cloud storage. Then I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut was like a gavel coming down. You are free to go, I said calmly. Graham stood, grabbing his suitcase handle. He puffed out his chest, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. You are going to be lonely here, Renly. Do not call me begging me to come back early when the water heater breaks. He started walking toward the front door, the wheels of his suitcase rumbling against the hardwood floor. Tessa followed him, still filming, excited to document their great escape. I stayed in the kitchen. I did not follow them to the door. I did not watch them leave. But just as Graham reached for the doorknob, I spoke up, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet house. Graham? I said. He paused, looking back over his shoulder, expecting a last-minute apology. Keep a copy of that agreement, I said, because when you eventually decide you want to talk to a lawyer, that piece of paper is the only ticket you have left. He frowned, confused by the cryptic nature of the threat, but the adrenaline of his departure was too strong. He shook his head, opened the door, and walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight. Tessa followed, the door slamming shut behind them. I stood alone in the silence. My heart was beating steadily, rhythmic and strong. I looked at the empty chair where he had sat. I looked at the half-eaten toast. Then, I picked up his plate and scraped the leftovers into the trash. The house was quiet, but it was not abandonment silence. It was the silence of a clean slate. I picked up my phone and saw a notification from the bank app. The separation agreement was signed. It was time to execute the next line of code in my program. I tapped the screen and dialed the number on the back of my debit card. Yes, I told the automated voice system. I need to speak to the fraud department, immediately. The day after Graham left was the most productive Tuesday of my career, though I did not bill a single hour to Vestralum. I requested a personal day, set my status to Do Not Disturb, and turned my dining room table into a command center. To the outside world, I was a heartbroken wife taking time to grieve. In reality, I was a surgeon performing a life-saving amputation. At 8 a.m., I called my company's payroll department, with a few clicks and a digital signature. My direct deposit, the primary lifeblood of the Cole family finances, was rerouted. My paycheck would no longer land in the joint checking account at Chase. Instead, it would flow into a new, high-yield savings account at a completely different bank, one where Graham's name appeared nowhere on the server. By 9, I was on the phone with the bank manager. I emailed him the PDF of the separation agreement Graham had so arrogantly signed the day before. The document was clear for the next 30 days. Finances were separate. I exercised my right as a joint account holder to freeze the main checking account. I did not drain it. I did not steal a cent. I simply put a lock on the door. If Graham wanted to buy a pack of gum, he would need to use his own money, which I knew for a fact was non-existent. Then came the cleanup. I logged into every legitimate credit card account in my name. I paid off the balances in full using my personal savings, bringing them to zero. Then, I lowered the credit limits to $500 and removed Graham as an authorized user. At 10, the atmosphere shifted from administrative to forensic. I dialed the fraud department of the major credit bureaus. This was the hardest call to make, not because of the logistics, but because of what it signified. Admitting your husband stole your identity is a special humiliation, but I pushed the feeling down and stuck to the script. I am reporting unauthorized accounts opened using my social security number, I told the agent. I did not authorize these 3 cards. I have the geolocated data proving I was not present when these charges were made. I am initiating a formal dispute. I gave them Graham's name not as my husband, but as the potential suspect. I did not sugarcoat it. By noon, those 3 cards, the ones he was currently carrying in his wallet to impress Lauren, were flagged. They would become useless plastic rectangles within the hour. The pièce de résistance, however, was the car. Technically, the black SUV Graham drove was his pride and joy. He washed it every Sunday. He had customized the rims, but legally, on paper, it was mine. I had signed the lease because his credit score was too low 3 years ago. I made every single monthly payment, and the separation agreement stated clearly that the vehicle registered to me remained in my possession. I called the leasing company. I explained that I was the sole lessee and that the vehicle was currently in possession of an unauthorized driver at a specific address. I arranged for a repossession team to pick it up, but I went a step further. I told them I wanted to terminate the lease early and trade it in. I am looking for something reliable, I told the dealership representative. A sedan. Something luxury. Something just for me. By 2 that afternoon, a tow truck was backing into Lauren's driveway. I was not there to see it, but I could imagine the scene. Graham, likely trying to play the man of the house, storms out to stop them, only to be shown the paperwork with his own signature on it, while his SUV was being hoisted onto the flatbed. I was at the dealership signing papers for a silver sedan with heated leather seats and a sound system that cost more than Graham's annual bonus. The fallout began at 4:30. My phone, which I had kept silent, lit up with a voicemail notification, then another, then 5 more. I sat on the couch with a glass of iced tea and played them on speaker. The first was confusion. Renly. My card was declined at the gas station. There must be a glitch. Call the bank. I am standing here like an idiot. The second was panic. The ATM says the account is frozen. What did you do? I need cash for dinner. Lauren's kid wants pizza. The third was pure rage. They took the truck. A guy just hooked up my truck and drove off. He said you authorized it. Are you insane? How am I supposed to get to work? You're stealing my car. The fourth was bargaining, his voice cracking. Look, babe, I get it. You are mad, but this is dangerous. Just unlock the account for 1 week. Just let me transfer $500. I will pay you back. Please. Lauren cannot drive me around. The final voicemail was a threat. This is financial abuse. Renly, I'm going to sue you. You cannot cut me off like this. I am your husband. I saved every single audio file. I backed them up to 3 different cloud servers. He was building my case for me. He was admitting he had no money, that he was relying on me, and that he was aware of the separation. While Graham was melting down, Tessa was busy trying to win the court of public opinion. She posted a video titled, "The Reality of Evil Stepmoms." In it, she was crying, actually crying this time, sitting on the floor of Lauren's guest room. She wailed about how I had cut off her father's access to his own hard-earned money, how I had left them stranded without a car, how I was vindictive and cruel. The video blew up. Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. The comments initially flooded with support. Stay strong, queen, and sue her. And that is toxic energy. But the internet is a fickle beast, and people are smarter than Tessa gave them credit for. About 2 hours in, the tide began to turn. A comment with 200 likes appeared. Wait, if your dad is still married, why is he living with his ex-wife? Another user replied, so, let me get this straight. He leaves his wife to move in with his ex, and he is mad that the wife stopped paying for his stuff. Make it make sense. Then came the investigators. I found the public records. The SUV is the woman's name. If he did not pay for it, it is not his car. Honey. Tessa started deleting comments, but she could not keep up. The narrative was slipping from her grasp. She had invited the world into our drama, and the world was starting to ask questions she could not answer without exposing the truth. Just as the sun was setting, painting the sky a bruised purple, my Instagram inbox pinged. It was a message request from a private account with 0 followers. I live next to Lauren York. We share a balcony wall. I have heard them laughing about you for weeks. I thought you should see these. Attached were 4 photos and 2 videos. The photos showed Graham and Lauren on the balcony, days before his surgery excuse, sharing a bottle of wine and kissing. The timestamp proved it was during one of his regional meetings. The video was even more damning. It was shaky footage shot through a gap in the fence, showing Tessa filming her dad and Lauren dancing in the living room. In the audio, you could clearly hear Graham say, "Once I get the bonus, I will figure out how to drop Renly without losing the house." I felt a cold shiver, but it was not fear. It was a thrill to get the final proof. I downloaded everything. I organized it into a folder named Exhibit B and emailed it to Marisol with the subject line, "The Smoking Gun." That night, the house was quiet. The morning's tension had evaporated, replaced by a strange, hollow peace. I found Milo sitting on the rug in the living room, his knees pulled up to his chest. He looked up at me, his eyes full of worry. "Dad called me," Milo said softly. "He was yelling. He said you stole all our money. He said we are going to be poor." My heart broke a little, but I sat down beside him and wrapped an arm around his shoulders. I did not lie to him. I did not treat him like a child who could not understand. "We are not going to be poor, Milo," I said firmly, "and I did not steal anything. I stopped someone else from stealing from us. Everything I did today was legal. Everything I did was to make sure that the money I earned goes to paying for this house, for your school, and for our food." Milo leaned his head on my shoulder. "Are we safe?" "We are safer than we have ever been." I promised him, "We are not taking a single penny that does not belong to us. We are just protecting what is ours. Do you understand?" He nodded slowly. "I think so." "Good," I whispered, kissing the top of his head. I looked around the living room. It was just us now. The parasites were gone. The accounts were secured. The evidence was locked away. I had spent years analyzing risk for billion-dollar corporations. But looking at my son, I realized this was the most important portfolio I would ever manage. And for the first time in a long time, the projection looked green. 2 weeks after the separation agreement took effect, my career trajectory shifted from a steady climb to a vertical launch. I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Vestralum, waiting for Owen Mallory, the director of operations. The air conditioning was humming, a low-frequency sound that usually calmed me, but today the atmosphere was electric. Owen did not call meetings at 10 a.m. Thursday unless something massive was on the table. He walked in, bypassed the pleasantries, and threw a slide deck onto the screen. "We just landed a whale," Owen said, tapping the laser pointer against the projection. "Internal audit for a national retail chain. They are flagging inconsistencies in their Midwestern inventory and regional discretionary spending. They suspect a laundering scheme disguised as vendor kickbacks." I saw the logo on the screen. My stomach did not drop. It tightened. Trail Forge Outfitters. It was the company Graham had worked at for 6 years. The company he claimed was about to promote him to district director. I stared at the logo. For a novice, this would be a moment of panic. For a professional, it was a moment of ethical calibration. I raised my hand immediately. "Owen," I said, my voice steady, "I have a conflict of interest to declare." The room went quiet. Owen looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Go on." "My estranged husband, Graham Cole, is a regional manager for Trail Forge. Specifically, he oversees the Illinois and Wisconsin districts." I watched Owen process this. He was a man who valued transparency above all. Had I stayed silent, and he found out later, my career would have been over. Speaking, I was putting my integrity on the table. "Estranged?" Owen asked. "We are legally separated as of 2 weeks ago," I clarified. "However, given the relationship, I cannot serve as a lead auditor or offer subjective recommendations on personnel. It would compromise the neutrality of the firm." Owen nodded slowly. I appreciate the disclosure. Renly, that is why I want you on this team. But not as a decision maker. I want you strictly on data analysis. You know the retail landscape, you strip the names, you run the algorithms on the raw numbers, and you tell us where the math breaks. Can you do that objectively? Numbers do not have feelings, I replied. I can audit the data. And I did. I treated the Trailforge files like any other data set. I did not search for Graham's name specifically. I simply ran the scripts we used to detect anomaly clusters. But because I knew Graham's habits, I knew exactly what the patterns represented. The Midwestern region's data was a mess. It lit up my dashboard like a Christmas tree. I found a recurring pattern of client acquisition dinners billed to the corporate expense account on Wednesday and Friday nights. The receipts were submitted under the guise of meeting potential bulk buyers. But I cross-referenced the dates. There were no bulk orders placed those weeks. The clients were ghosts. The restaurants, however, were real. They were the same steakhouses and oyster bars in the Harbor Crest district that I had seen on our personal bank statements before I froze them. Graham was double-dipping. He was using the corporate card to fund the affair, and when he hit the corporate limit, he had switched to my personal credit lines. Then I saw the KPI manipulation. His region's sales numbers were inflated by 18%. He had been shifting inventory between stores to count the same stock twice during quarterly counts, making his performance look stellar to secure his bonus. The bonus he was banking on to pay for his new life with Lauren. I compiled the report. I did not write, "My husband is a liar." I wrote Regional Manager ID 492 shows a consistent pattern of misappropriated promotional funds totaling $12,000 over 3 quarters. Inventory rotation suggests artificial inflation of sales metrics. I hit send. 3 days later, the fallout reached the public domain, or at least the industry's gossip channels. Trailforge initiated a sweeping internal investigation. A memo went out freezing all regional manager expense cards. Graham was now in a vice grip. I had cut off his access to my money. Now, his employer had cut off his access to the company credit card he had been using as a lifeline. He was stuck in a house with a woman who expected him to be a provider, with no car, no credit, and a frozen corporate account, back at Vestra Lum. My handling of the situation did not go unnoticed. Owen called me into his office the following Monday. "You handled that with absolute precision," he said. "Most people would have crumbled or tried to settle a score. You just gave us the data. The client is ecstatic. They are cleaning the house." He slid a folder across the desk. "We are opening a new division for high net worth individual risk assessment. We need someone to lead the team. It comes with a 20% salary increase and a significant stock option package." I signed the contract right there. That signature felt different than the one on my marriage license. This was a contract with myself. The first thing I did with my raise was not buy a car or a vacation. I invested in my image. I had spent years wearing practical, washable blends because I was always cleaning up messes literal and metaphorical. I hired a virtual stylist I found on Instagram, a woman who specialized in corporate minimalism. We purged my closet. Out went the floral blouses that made me look soft. In came structured blazers in charcoal and navy, silk camisoles, and trousers that fit perfectly. I bought a pair of Italian leather loafers that did not pinch my toes. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see a tired mom. I saw a woman commanding the room. I hired a fee-only financial advisor. We set up a diversified portfolio. I started maxing out my 401k. I signed up for a weekend seminar on real estate investment because I decided that my next home would not be a joint tenancy. It would be a deed with only my name on it. This was a luxurious life. It was not about logos or flash. It was about the quiet, unshakable confidence of knowing that if everything burned down tomorrow, I had the resources to rebuild it by myself. Milo noticed the change, too. The tension in the house had evaporated. Without Graham's passive-aggressive sighs or Tessa's judgmental camera lens, our home became a sanctuary. "Mom," Milo said one evening, looking up from his homework, "is it okay if Leo comes over to work on our robot? We made the district finals." Of course, I said, smiling. Order pizza. Put it on the card. Really? He looked surprised. Graham used to complain that having kids over was too loud and too expensive. Really, I said. It is our house, Milo. We can have noise. We can have pizza. Leo came over. They laughed. They sprawled on the living room rug with wires and coding manuals. I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, listening to the sound of my son being a happy, carefree teenager. He was thriving. His grades were up. He was sleeping through the night. I realized then that my revenge was not about hurting Graham. It was about outgrowing him. While he was likely panicking in a guest room, trying to explain to Lauren why his company card was declined at the grocery store, I was building an empire. I was becoming the woman he always pretended to be but never had the discipline to become. I was high value, and I was just getting started. The banging started at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, desperate thud of a fist against wood that echoed through the entire hallway. I was sitting on the living room floor, packing books into boxes, surrounded by the quiet order I had reclaimed. My first instinct was fear, but my second was relief. I had sent Milo to stay with my sister in Chicago for the week, specifically to avoid the fallout I knew was coming. He was safe, asleep in a guest room 2 hours away, while I walked toward the door with my phone already recording. Open the damn door. Renly. Graham's voice was muffled but unmistakable. It was thick with cheap whiskey and rage. I live here. My name is on the lease. You cannot lock me out of my own house. I did not unlock the chain. I did not yell back. I simply checked the viewfinder to make sure the timestamp was visible and spoke clearly for the recording. Graham, you signed a separation agreement relinquishing your right to reside here for 30 days, I said, my voice projecting just enough to be heard through the wood. If you do not leave, I am calling the police. I do not care about your stupid paper, he screamed, kicking the bottom of the door. I have nowhere to go. Lauren kicked me out. Open the door. I did not engage. I dialed the building security. 2 minutes later, I watched through the peephole as the night shift guard, a burly man named Marcus, who had always liked Milo, stepped out of the elevator. He put a hand on Graham's shoulder. Graham spun around, shouting about his rights, about how I was a thief who had stolen his life. Sir, you need to lower your voice, Marcus said firmly. We have complaints from 3 units. You are trespassing. Doors down the hallway began to crack open. Mrs. Gable from 4B peeked out in her nightgown. The young couple from 4F stood in their doorway, watching openly. It was a community theater of humiliation, and Graham was the lead actor. She destroyed my family, Graham yelled, pointing a shaking finger at my closed door. She cut off my money. Go home, buddy, the neighbor from 4F called out, leaning against his doorframe. It is midnight. Nobody cares. Marcus escorted him to the elevator. Graham's protests grew fainter until the elevator doors dinged and slid shut. I stopped recording. I saved the video to the cloud. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, knowing that the man banging on my door like a stranger was someone I had once promised to love forever. But looking at the dent he had left on the door, I knew I had made the right call. He was not a partner. He was a liability that had just defaulted. 3 days later, the narrative shifted again, coming from a direction I never expected. I opened my email at work to find a message with the subject line, "The Truth About Graham." The sender was Lauren York. My finger hovered over the delete button. I assumed it was a diatribe, a defense of her actions, or a demand for money. But curiosity the auditors need to see all the data made me click it. The email was long. It was messy. It was clearly written at 3 a.m. Renly. It began, I do not expect you to like me. I do not expect you to forgive me. But I think you need to know what he has been telling me. Attached were screenshots of text messages between Graham and Lauren from 3 months ago. As I read them, the picture became sickeningly clear. Graham had not just lied to me. He had lied to her. He had told Lauren that I was mentally unstable, that I was hoarding our money, and that I had kicked him out of the bedroom years ago. He had painted himself as a victim of a cold, abusive wife, begging Lauren for a place to stay because I had supposedly drained his accounts. I thought I was helping him escape. Lauren wrote, I thought he was leaving a toxic situation. But then he started using my credit card for online gambling. He borrowed $500 from my brother and never paid it back. And when I asked him about the separation agreement, he told me you made him sign it at gunpoint. I know that is a lie. I saw Tessa's video where he signed it laughing. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the screen. Graham had played us both. He had leveraged her emotional vulnerability, just as he had leveraged my financial stability. I kicked him out. The email continued. He is staying at a motel on Route 9. I am done. I do not want to be the other woman anymore. I want to be a witness. The twist was so sharp I almost laughed. The woman who was supposed to be my nemesis was offering to hand me the final nail for Graham's coffin. The public confirmation came that evening, courtesy of Tessa's inability to put her phone down. She went live on TikTok, sitting in the passenger seat of what looked like a rental car. She looked tired, her makeup smeared. Guys, it is so hard right now, she was saying to the camera. We are going through so much. But she had forgotten to check her surroundings. In the background, outside the car window, Graham was standing on the sidewalk, shouting into his phone. He did not know he was being broadcast. I do not care what she said. Graham's voice cut through Tessa's monologue. I just need Renly to lift the freeze if she unlocks the account. I can pay you back. I just need access to the money. The comments section exploded. Did he just say he needs her money? User NapQueen wrote, I thought he was the provider. Another commented, Tessa, why is your dad broke if he is so successful? So he is mad because his wife stopped paying for his affair. Tessa saw the comments and panicked, ending the live stream abruptly. But the internet is forever. Screen recordings of that snippet were already circulating on drama forums. The facade of the honest father and the evil stepmother had crumbled. They had exposed themselves as grifters. I replied to Lauren's email the next morning. I kept it professional, devoid of sisterly solidarity. Lauren, I wrote, I appreciate the information. My attorney, Marisol Vega, will be in touch to take a formal statement regarding his financial conduct while residing with you. If you are willing to testify to these facts in court, we can ensure the divorce is finalized quickly. I did not sign it sincerely or warmly. I signed it Renly Hall. We were not friends. We were not allies. We were simply two independent entities who had realized that the same asset was toxic, with the legal case now practically foolproof. I turned my attention to the future. I was done with the old apartment. It smelled of Graham's cologne and the stale memory of his lies. I spent my Saturday touring the grand opening of the Meridian, a new high-rise complex near the financial district. The leasing agent showed me a unit on the 25th floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light, bleaching out any shadows. There was a chef's kitchen with an island big enough for Milo and his robotics team. The building had a 24-hour gym, a heated lap pool, and a concierge who screened visitors, meaning Graham could never pound on my door again. The rent is $4,000 a month, the agent said, watching me for a reaction. A year ago, that number would have made me hyperventilate. Now, with my promotion and my restructured finances, it was exactly 30% of my monthly take-home pay. It was within my risk tolerance. I walked to the window and looked at the city. I could see the park where I took Milo when he was a baby. I could see the skyline where Vestralum's tower stood. I will take it, I said, and I want to sign a 2-year lease. Just you on the lease? The agent asked. Just me, I said, and the words tasted like champagne. I was building a fortress of light and glass. Graham was sleeping in a motel on Route 9, chasing a narrative that no longer existed. I was not just surviving the separation, I was ascending. And as I looked down at the city, I knew that the view from the top was worth every single uncomfortable audit I had performed to get here. The fluorescent lights of the Lakehurst family courtroom were humming with a low electrical buzz that reminded me of the server room at Vestralum. It was a sound I associated with data processing, with the cold, hard logic of binary choices. For Graham, however, I imagined it sounded like a countdown. I sat at the mahogany table on the left, my posture straight, my hands clasped loosely over a manila folder. Beside me, Marisol Vega was arranging her documents with the precision of a surgeon laying out scalpels. She wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Graham's car, and she radiated a predatory calmness. On the other side of the aisle, Graham looked diminished. He was wearing a suit I recognized from 3 years ago, slightly tight at the shoulders, and he was whispering frantically to his attorney. His lawyer was young, perhaps 3 years out of law school, with an ill-fitting collar and a nervous habit of tapping his pen. It was the best representation Graham could afford with frozen assets and no job. Behind them, in the gallery, sat Tessa. She was slumped in the wooden pew, arms crossed, her eyes darting around the room. Her phone was conspicuously absent from her hand, likely confiscated by the bailiff or hidden deep in her bag on strict orders from the judge to prevent any courtroom live streams. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Harrison entered. She was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a reputation for having zero tolerance for theatrics. Marisol wasted no time. She did not play to emotions. She played to the documentation. "Your Honor," Marisol began, standing up, "we are asking the court to enforce the separation of assets agreement signed by both parties on October 3rd. We are also asking for a full dismissal of any claims for spousal support based on the defendant's documented history of financial infidelity and fraud." Graham's lawyer tried to object, stammering something about duress and coercion regarding the signing of the agreement. Marisol simply nodded to me. I handed her the flash drive. "Exhibit A," Marisol said, plugging the drive into the court's media system. "Video evidence of the defendant signing the agreement, filmed by his own daughter, Ms. Tessa Cole, and posted publicly to TikTok." The screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. There was Graham, standing in my kitchen, laughing. He looked arrogant. He looked dismissive. "I do not need your money. Renly, I make my own." The audio was crisp. There was no gun to his head. There was no shouting. There was only a man smugly signing away his rights because he thought he was untouchable. Judge Harrison watched the clip over the rim of her glasses. She made a note on her pad. "He seems quite cheerful for a man under duress. Counselor," she remarked dryly to Graham's lawyer. Marisol moved seamlessly to the financials. She projected a timeline that looked like one of my risk audit spreadsheets. "Exhibit B," she said. "Bank statements from the joint account showing unauthorized withdrawals on Wednesdays and Fridays. Cross-referenced with Exhibit C, Ms. Hall's credit report, showing 3 credit cards opened fraudulently using her Social Security number. The IP addresses used to open these accounts trace back to the defendant's personal smartphone." Then came the audio. Marisol played the voicemails. The courtroom heard Graham's voice fill the silence. First, the entitlement. "You do not have the right." Next, bargaining. "Just $500. Finally, the aggression, "I will sue you." Graham sank lower in his chair. He rubbed his face with his hands. He was watching his own character be dissected, not by opinions, but by timestamps and metadata. "We would like to call our witness," Marisol announced. "Ms. Lauren York." Graham's head snapped up. Tessa gasped audibly in the back row. They had not expected this. They thought Lauren was neutral ground, or at least silent collateral damage. Lauren walked to the stand. She looked tired, but composed. She avoided looking at Graham entirely. "Ms. York," Marisol asked, "on the morning of October 3rd, did Mr. Cole inform you that he was moving in to act as a caregiver for your post-surgical recovery?" "No," Lauren stated clearly into the microphone. "I did not have surgery." "I have not had surgery in 5 years. Then why did he move in?" "Because we were rekindling a romantic relationship," Lauren said, her voice devoid of shame, factual. "He told me he had left his wife. He told me Renly was financially abusive and that he needed a place to stay until his assets were untangled. I believed him. Did you ever ask Ms. Hall to pay for his expenses? Never, Lauren said. I was under the impression he was solvent. When I realized he was using my credit cards and lying about his employment status, I asked him to leave. Graham's lawyer declined to cross-examine her. He knew any question he asked would only dig the hole deeper. Then, in a move that surprised even me, Graham's lawyer called Tessa to the stand. It was a Hail Mary pass. He wanted to paint the picture of a fractured family, hoping to gain sympathy for a father who just wanted to be with his kids. Tessa sat in the witness box, looking small. Tessa, the young lawyer asked gently, how did your stepmother treat you during the marriage? Did you feel welcome? She was cold, Tessa said, her voice trembling slightly. She treated us like we were employees. She was always obsessing over money. It felt like a prison. Marisol stood up for the cross-examination. She did not raise her voice. Ms. Cole, Marisol said, holding up a printout of a screenshot. You posted a video on October 5th titled, Evil Stepmom Leaves Us Homeless. In that video, you claimed Ms. Hall stole your father's car. Is that correct? Yes, Tessa said defiantly. Are you aware that the vehicle was leased solely in Ms. Hall's name and paid for exclusively from her personal income? Well, my dad drove it, Tessa argued. That is not the question, Marisol said. I am asking about the narrative you constructed. In another video, dated September 12th, you edited a clip of Ms. Hall asking you to clean your dishes to make it sound like she was screaming at you. Did you alter the audio speed and pitch to distort reality? Tessa froze. It is content, she muttered. It is just for entertainment. So, Marisol said, looking at the judge, you admit to fabricating scenarios and altering evidence to fit a narrative for public consumption. You admit that truth is secondary to views. I did not mean it like that, Tessa snapped, looking at her father for help, but Graham was staring at the table. No further questions, Marisol said. The final blow was the Trail Forge document. Marisol presented the internal audit report from Vestralum. She was careful. This was not a criminal trial, so she did not accuse him of embezzlement. She simply framed it as proof of financial instability. Your Honor, Marisol concluded, this report, accepted by the Executive Board of Trail Forge Outfitters, details a pattern of financial mismanagement by Mr. Cole. He was terminated for cause 3 weeks ago. We submit this to prove that Mr. Cole is not a victim of financial abuse, but rather a perpetrator of financial mismanagement. To award him spousal support would be to reward fiscal negligence. Judge Harrison took 20 minutes to review the evidence in her chambers. When she returned, the courtroom was dead silent. I have reviewed the exhibits, Judge Harrison said. Her voice was monotone, the system's voice working exactly as intended. The separation agreement signed on October 3rd is deemed valid and binding. The defendant entered into it willingly, as proven by the video evidence. She turned a page. Ms. Hall is awarded full ownership of all assets currently in her name, including the savings accounts and the investment portfolio. Mr. Cole's request for spousal support is denied with prejudice. Regarding the minor child, Milo, sole physical custody is awarded to the mother. Mr. Cole will have visitation rights on alternate weekends, provided he maintains a stable residence. Child support is set at the state minimum, adjusted for Mr. Cole's current unemployment status. She banged the gavel. Case closed. It was over. In less than 2 hours, 4 years of marriage were dissolved into a court order. I stood up. I shook Marisol's hand. Thank you, I said softly. You did the work, Renly, she replied. I just presented the data. I walked toward the exit. Graham was standing near the double doors, holding his cheap briefcase. He looked older than his years. The charm was gone. The salesman's veneer had cracked, revealing the desperate man beneath. Tessa was waiting for him by the water fountain, refusing to make eye contact with me. Graham stepped into my path. He leaned in close, his voice a low hiss, trying to regain some shred of power. You think you won, he whispered, his eyes dark. But you are going to go home to that empty apartment. Renly, no husband, no daughter, just you and your spreadsheets. You will regret this. No one can stand being lonely forever. I stopped. I looked at him. Really looked at him. One last time. I saw the fear behind the threat. I saw a man who had never learned to be alone with himself. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. Graham, I said, my voice calm and clear enough for Tessa to hear. I did not just win the lawsuit, I just redeemed the next 40 years of my life. That is an asset you cannot put a price on, and I promise you, I will not waste a single second of it. I pushed past him and walked out into the hallway. The air outside the courtroom tasted different. It tasted like zero debt. It tasted like total solvency. It tasted like freedom. The key to the door of my new apartment on the 25th floor felt heavy in my hand. But it was a good kind of weight. It was the weight of ownership. Moving into the Meridian was not just a change of address. It was a complete recalibration of my reality. The apartment faced Greenbend Park, and every morning, I woke up to a view of emerald treetops and the distant, shimmering skyline of the city, framed by floor-to-ceiling glass. I did not rush to fill the space. In my previous life with Graham, our home had been cluttered with things we bought on sale, furniture that was good enough, and the chaotic detritus of Tessa's influencers in training lifestyle. Here, I embraced the empty space. I chose a palette of soft creams, warm taupes, and slate grays. I bought a single, deep-seated sofa in Italian linen. I installed a long, live-edge walnut dining table that served as the centerpiece of the open kitchen. The balcony was my sanctuary. I placed 2 weather-resistant armchairs there and surrounded them with terracotta pots filled with lavender and ornamental grasses. It was minimalist, yes, but every item had been chosen with intention. I was no longer curating a home to survive in. I was curating a home to thrive in. A promotion to Director of Personal Risk Analysis at Vestralum brought a significant salary increase and a stock option package that finally reflected my fair market value. But I didn't let the money sit idle. I treated my life like a high-value client portfolio. I refined the investment plan that my advisor and I had started with, a smart woman named Elena, who understood that my goal was not just wealth, but also solid security. Together, we built a fortress. We allocated 40% of my bonus into a diversified index fund. We took another chunk and put a down payment on a small, practical one-bedroom condo near the University District. It was a rental property, a source of passive income that would pay for itself within 10 years. It was not glamorous, but it was smart. It was the kind of move Graham would have called boring, because it did not come with a shiny badge of status. But to me, seeing that monthly rent check deposit into my account was the most exciting feeling in the world. Then there was the Life Fund. We set aside a budget for 2 major trips a year. No more camping in muddy state parks because it was economical. I wanted Milo to see the world, not just the backyard. My personal transformation was subtle but profound. I stopped shopping at the discount outlets where I used to hunt for bargains to balance Graham's overspending. I started attending women in finance networking breakfasts, and I realized I needed a uniform that matched my ambition. I found a tailor downtown who adjusted 3 bespoke suits for me, navy, charcoal, and a deep plum. When I walked into a boardroom wearing a jacket that fit my shoulders perfectly and heels that were made of real leather, I carried myself differently. I learned the power of the word no. I rejected projects that did not serve my career goals. I declined social invitations that drained my energy. I realized that true luxury was not about saying yes to everything. It was about having the agency to curate your time. I invested heavily in experiences. I hired a personal trainer who came to the building's gym twice a week, not to make me skinny, but to make me strong. I signed up for a weekend negotiation course at the business school. I went to a silent retreat in the mountains for 3 days, something that terrified me at first but ended up being the most restorative 72 hours of my life. I was building a version of Renly Hall that was physically and mentally resilient. Milo was blooming in this new soil. I let him design his room. He chose a deep, serious navy blue for the walls and industrial-style shelving for his Lego sets and robotics trophies. He joined the school's competitive robotics team, and for the first time, he invited friends over without hesitation. One Saturday morning, I stood in the kitchen making pancakes, while Milo and 3 of his teammates sat around the walnut table, arguing passionately about coding syntax. There was laughter. There was the smell of maple syrup and coffee. There was no walking on eggshells. There was no fear that a stepsister would mock them or a stepfather would grumble about the noise. "This is good, Mom," Milo said, his mouth full, giving me a thumbs up. "It is, isn't it?" I replied. Looking at him, he looked younger, lighter. The shadows under his eyes were gone. I treated myself to the things Graham had always forbidden. For 5 years, I had admired a specific vintage tank watch, a classic piece with a rectangular face and a simple black leather strap. Graham had always sneered at it, calling it a waste of money that could be spent on more practical things, by which he meant his own hobbies. The week after my promotion was finalized, I walked into the boutique and bought it. I paid in full. Now, every time I checked the time, I was reminded that my time belonged exclusively to me. For spring break, I took Milo to New York City. We stayed in a hotel with a view of Central Park. We went to Hamilton on Broadway. We spent 6 hours roaming the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We ate pizza in Brooklyn and cheesecake in Times Square. "Dad used to say New York was a dirty trap," Milo said one evening as we walked through the glittering lights of Times Square. "Your dad had a limited perspective," I said gently, squeezing his shoulder. "The world is big. Milo, you do not have to be afraid of it." At work, my team treated me with a new respect. I was no longer just the reliable worker bee. I was a leader. They saw a single mother who managed a high-pressure department, left at 5:30 sharp to have dinner with her son, and never looked frazzled. I heard the whispers near the water cooler, the younger analysts calling me goals. It was strange to be viewed as an icon of success when, just months ago, I had felt like a failure for not being able to save a dying marriage. Friends and well-meaning colleagues often tried to nudge me back into the dating pool. "You are young," they would say. "You are successful. You should meet someone." I would just smile and shake my head. They did not understand. They thought a woman's success was incomplete without a partner to share it. But as I stood on my balcony at night, wrapped in a cashmere throw, watching the city lights twinkle like diamonds below me, I knew the truth. The most expensive, luxurious thing I owned was not the lease on the apartment, nor the vintage watch on my wrist, nor the stocks in my portfolio. It was peaceful. It was the ability to sit alone in a quiet room and feel completely whole. I did not need a man to validate my existence or fill the silence. I had built a life so rich, so full of texture and purpose, that the idea of compromising it for the sake of not being alone seemed like a bad investment. I was my own primary asset, and for the first time in my life, I was compounding interest daily. It was a Saturday evening, the kind that feels heavy with the promise of rest. I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, a glass of chilled white wine in my hand, watching the city lights flicker below like a sea of electric stars. The air was cool, smelling of the river and the lavender I had planted in the terracotta pots. My phone buzzed on the glass table. It was an unknown number. Usually, I let unknown numbers go to voicemail. My time is an asset, and I do not spend it on telemarketers or wrong numbers. But something, perhaps a lingering instinct from my days of managing chaos, made me pick it up. "Hello?" I said. "Renly." The voice was unrecognizable at first. It was hoarse, thick with mucus and exhaustion. It lacked the sharp, sarcastic edge I was used to. "Tessa?" I asked, setting my wine glass down. "Yeah," she breathed, and then she broke. It wasn't the performative crying she did for her videos. This was the ugly, gasping sobbing of someone who has hit the bottom of a well and realized there is no ladder. Between the gasps, the story spilled out. Lauren had evicted them 3 days ago. Apparently, Graham's charm had worn off the moment he asked to borrow money for the third time, and Lauren, realizing she had traded one deadbeat for another, had thrown his suitcases onto the lawn. They were staying in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that charges by the hour. Tessa had lost her job at the coffee shop because she kept calling in sick to film content, and then, the final blow, she was pregnant, and the boyfriend who she thought was the one had blocked her number the moment she showed him the test. "Renly, please," Tessa wept. "You are the only one who ever kept things normal. We just need a crash spot, just for a few weeks. Or if you could just tell the lawyers to undo the agreement Dad says if you unlock the joint account. We can get an apartment. It is your fault he has no money. So you have to fix it. Right, please." Even in her desperation, the blame shifted. It was a reflex for them. I listened. I did not interrupt. When she was finished, silence hung on the line. "Meet me tomorrow at 11, I said. "I will be at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Meet me in the lobby." "The Ritz?" she asked, sounding confused. 11 o'clock. Tessa, do not be late." I hung up. The next morning, the contrast was stark enough to be a scene in a movie. I was wearing a cream-colored silk suit, preparing to host a brunch for a group of female investors I had organized. The lobby was filled with the scent of fresh lilies and expensive coffee. When Graham and Tessa walked through the revolving doors, they looked like ghosts from a past life. Graham had turned 10 in 2 months. His skin was gray, his shirt was wrinkled, and he had a desperate, shifting look in his eyes. Tessa looked frail. She wore oversized sweatpants and no makeup. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like a child who had woken up in a nightmare. They spotted me and hurried over, hope flaring in their eyes. They thought the setting meant I was opening the vault. They figured I was going to write a check. "Renly," Graham said, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. "Thank God. Look, I am sorry. I was stupid. Lauren meant nothing. We can fix this. I miss us. I miss our family." "I am pregnant, Renly," Tessa whispered, touching her stomach. "I can't raise a baby in a motel." I looked at them. I felt a pang of pity. Yes, I am human, but I felt no guilt. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I handed it to Graham. "What is this?" he asked, unfolding it. "A check." "It is a list," I said calmly. "It has the contact information for the state's housing assistance program. There is a number for a legal aid office that handles family disputes for low-income individuals, and there is the address of a nonprofit that provides supplies and medical care for young mothers." Graham stared at the paper. His face reddened. "Resources. You are giving me a pamphlet. I am your husband." "Ex-husband," I corrected him. "And no, I am not giving you money. I am not unlocking the accounts. I am not letting you move into my home." "But why?" Tessa cried. "You have so much. Look at this place. You can afford to help us." "I can afford this life because I stopped paying for yours," I said, my voice low but hard as diamond. "I spent 4 years carrying this family on my back. I fixed every mistake. I paid every bill, and you both treated me like an obstacle. I am not your safety net anymore. Tessa, I am not the villain preventing you from happiness. I am just a stranger who used to know you." "You are heartless," Graham spat, crumpling the paper in his fist. "You are a cold, bitter woman. You will die alone." "I am not alone," I said. "I am free." Graham opened his mouth to scream, to make a scene, but he looked around at the security guards standing near the pillars, at the well-dressed people staring, and he shrank. He knew he had no power here. He turned and stormed toward the exit, the defeated shuffle of a man who had gambled everything and lost. Tessa stayed for a second longer. She looked at me, really looked at me, seeing the suit, the confidence, the peace in my eyes. "I should have listened to you," she whispered. "Back in the kitchen, when you told me to stop filming and start working, I should have listened." "Yes," I said softly. "You should have." She turned and followed her father out the revolving doors, disappearing into the gray city street. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket and walked toward the elevators. I pressed the button for the rooftop terrace. Upstairs, the sun was shining. A dozen women in blazers and dresses turned to smile as I walked in. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated on the breeze. I walked to the edge of the terrace and looked down. Far below, two tiny figures were walking down the sidewalk, arguing, disappearing into the noise of the traffic. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Milo. It was a picture of him and his robotics team holding a trophy, huge grins on their faces. "We won regionals," the caption read. I smiled. I took a sip of my mimosa. The liquid was cold and sweet. I realized then that revenge is not about watching them suffer. I did not care if they suffered. My revenge was this. It was the sunlight. It was the trophy. It was silk on my skin. It was the absolute, unshakable knowledge that I had built a life so high, so fortified, and so valuable that they could never, ever touch me again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are listening from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Renly's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so this story can reach even more people.